I had become an intern at Redeemer. Part of the task of being an intern, so I found out, was that I was asked to start a community group in my home. I'm like, okay, well, this is part of my job, cleaning up your apartment and making food and hosting these discussions in your home regarding the Bible. There was a gentleman that joined per the invitation of one of our male members. And it's not long after his friends are joining that I can tell this guy has a lot of issues with women and women in leadership. Increasingly over his time in the group, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. He's getting there earlier before everyone else, or everyone would leave and he would stay behind. I was having trouble getting him to leave. Not only that, I was alone with this weird guy that I didn't feel safe with. But I didn't really know what to do with my feelings on the subject. Before I healed my codependency and my own issues with looking out for myself and always putting the needs of other people first, no matter how I was doing, that's the former me, and that's the me that's in the stories. What I did with feeling uncomfortable and unsafe with this man was I just kept it to myself, and I got really quiet about it, and I just kind of stuffed it down. And I decided to just ignore it and push through. That really did not do me any favors. There was one time in the group, I left a bottle of whiskey out on the counter, and he just walks over to the bottle in the middle of the group, opens it, and starts helping himself. We all just kind of watched him do a couple of shots, and he's in the group drunk. He was very rambunctious during that meeting, and he was just so out of control. Then after that, I hid any alcohol I had in my home. I hid it in my closet. That became a new part of my lifestyle. I was like, I can't keep these things out because of this man that I'm inviting into my home through this church. And he's becoming more and more erratic. At one point, comes into the group with a black eye. And we're like, whoa, like what happened? He proceeds to tell us that he was arrested because he got into an altercation with a woman who he didn't like the way that she was talking to him. So he assaulted her and he pinned her to the ground and sat on her and wouldn't get up. And when she was screaming for help, a bunch of men came over and started hitting him to get him off of her. And he told our group that he was shocked that the cops, when they came, took her side and they didn't want to hear anything that he had to say because he was really hurt by the way that she had spoken with him. When I heard this story, it's like, ooh, it's hard to talk about it now. When I heard this story, I was so afraid. I was like, this guy is in my home and he assaulted a woman, and he is pretty convinced that he's in the right here. And so all of the feelings that I had been like stuffing down 6 months, I was afraid of this guy. It was just starting to become apparent that this had just been let go way too long. He clearly had serious issues with women, and he was violent. So mind you, this story is being told with about 10 witnesses. I forgot to mention, like a couple of weeks before he comes in telling us the story, my co-leader, a woman, pulled me aside and said, I don't like the way that he's looking at you during these meetings. And I was like, oh my gosh, someone else sees it. Like I would make a point and he would just be staring at me like this, like his eyes is like beady and wide, and he'd be shaking. I hate when she talks. So like I would just kind of like ignore it and just pretend I didn't see it. And my co-leader was like, I don't like the way he looks at you. I'm really afraid for you. She had decided to come over to the apartment early to beat him there and then always make sure to stay with me until he left. So we'd already started these safety plan type behaviors. And then he comes in and he drops this story of assaulting a woman. I had already reached out to the Redeemer pastors, and they told me to get in touch with my leadership coach. Oh, it's a woman, and I messaged her, and the first time I talked to her on the phone about my concerns is listening like, okay, oh yeah, this does sound kind of weird. Let me talk to the pastors about it, and I'll get back to you. So then I call her again, and this time her tone is like, she picks up, and I'm like, hey, it's Jordan. I'm following up on what we discussed that's going on in my community group. I'm wondering like what we should do, and we really need help. And this time her tone's like this. Oh, hey, Jordan. Yeah, it's just a completely different shift in her tone. Up until this date, I've never asked for help. This was just simply, I reached out to this woman for help. She got in touch with the pastors. And here's my kind of take on probably what happened. They didn't have a protocol for what I was going through. It was so outside their purview of what is a reality for women. They didn't have the infrastructure to be able to handle a predator like this in a home group where women were leading the group. So instead of acknowledging that and owning that, this is the classic thing I've seen time and time again from Redeemer pastors. We're going to make Jordan complaining the issue. So I'm following the proper protocol. They always said, if you ever need help or if you need anything, like call your leadership coach. So I do. She's going to escalate it and bring the pastors involved. She does. And then when they kind of indicate to her, like, we don't know what to do with this, she's just like, her tone's like, okay, Jordan. So it turns into exactly the reason I stuffed these feelings down to begin with. I didn't feel like I was going to be believed. I felt like if I asked for anything, it was just too much. And all my worst fears came true. I was treated like it wasn't really happening, and what I was asking for was just too much. At this point, I'm like, well, let me get in touch with the pastor myself. I email him and I'm like, there's a guy in our group who we've been afraid of, has been showing some erratic, strange, bizarre tendencies, and he recently got arrested for assaulting someone, and I'm afraid, and he's like in my home, and I don't know what to do. He's like, okay, well, what's his name? And I'll look him up on our database. I'm just asking all those kinds of questions, and I'm still like pushing for like some sort of problem solving step that we're going to take together. So I just asked the pastor, will you come visit the group and be there with us? And he doesn't write back. I call the pastor. His cell phone number was on the signature of the email. So I call his cell phone and it goes to voicemail. So I leave him a voicemail. I don't hear back. Finally, he emails back and he says, listen, there's nothing we can do because he's not a member of the church. And so I remember just feeling really alone and really, really afraid. And also at the same time, struggling with shame for feeling like I'm too much. This pastor thinks I'm just making this up, so I don't feel believed. This guy goes to a birthday party, a community group birthday party, and he ends up destroying the birthday party, embarrassing our friend in the group. She's a Broadway performer. All of her Broadway friends were there. This guy crashes the party. Then I want to host a party, and I saw what he did to her party. So I'm like, well, I'm not inviting the community group. He overhears about this party I'm having. He ends up getting on Facebook and writing a message to a bunch of people at Redeemer asking if they knew where my party was that night. So people he doesn't know, but he knows they're my friends on Facebook. And one of them happens to be a woman who works at Redeemer. So she messages me and says, do you know this guy? I don't know him. He sent me a message on Facebook asking me if I knew where you were at tonight and if I knew the address because he lost the email invitation to the party he's supposed to attend with you. Really got afraid then because I'm like, he's stalking me. And I just told this woman who was on Redeemer staff, like, don't tell him I'm having a party. Just don't write back. She goes, done. Now I'm being stalked. And at this point, I know that Redeemer leadership isn't there to help me. I just get on Facebook and I notice his profile picture is him holding a gun, and the gun is pointed at the lens of the camera. I'm pretty sure every guy that's ever blown away a high school, not making light of this, has had a picture like that, and that's been like in training one of the big red flags of someone who's incredibly violent, who's about to hurt people. He has a profile picture of him pointing the nozzle of a gun directly into the photo with a smirk on his face, like, I'm a killer. I'm like, this is not happening. It's so surreal, you guys, to go through something like this. I'm afraid. I am completely and utterly afraid. And so I do the only thing I know to do. I call a relative who happens to be a police officer, and I tell this relative, I am so afraid. He takes me seriously. What happened? So I tell him everything I just told you now. Got arrested by the police. His profile picture is holding a gun. He's stalking me on Facebook. Won't take an over and answer. Drinks erratically. Ruins groups. Can't take instruction. Hates women. Stares at me with this deadly, like, dead eye stare like he wants to kill me. You look at it and you don't think it's really happening, but you're like, is it really happening? And so you just gaslight yourself. You just don't want it to be true. So you're trying to make it untrue by trying to unimagine it, but you didn't imagine it. It is happening. So my relatives just said very calmly, Jordan, it's just a matter of time before he assaults you. And he said exactly what I had been feeling in my gut. I'm not safe. It's what my co-leader saw, and it's what I saw, and now it's what a police officer in his professional opinion thinks, was that I was not safe. So I was like, what do I do? He's like, give me his phone number. And he calls this guy up. I'm calling to let you know that you are not invited to that group any longer because of your behavior. And the guy's like, okay. And he's like, my name is so-and-so. I'm a police officer at so-and-so. I just want to let you know, if you break that boundary, I'll be coming to New York City myself, and I'd like to meet you, and we can have a talk about it face to face. But I assure you, your life will become very complicated if you don't heed my warning that you are not invited to her home. And the guy just goes silent, and then he says, are you still there? Yeah, I'm here. Can I have a response to the boundary I just set with you? And he goes, yeah, fine, sure. And then he hangs up. My relative, who is a police officer, calls me back and says, I've taken care of it. You're not going to see him again. I'd be shocked if you did. And if he does, I am going to come to New York and I'm going to make his life very complicated. It's very vague. What does that even mean? But it's a uniformed police officer coming into the city on behalf of a female relative. I know how to take care of stalkers and people just like you, and I'll do it myself if I have to. He didn't say he was going to hurt him. He didn't say he was going to break the law. He just said, I have a position of authority and power here, and I'll use it to keep a person in my family safe. Very basic stuff. As if it already wasn't bad enough. Like, here's where it all just took a turn for the worst. Did this guy ever come back to the group? No. So why did it get worse? A couple of months later, that same pastor that I couldn't get to call me back calls me, and I pick up, and he says, Jordan, hello, I need to speak with you. I was like, okay, yeah, what's up? He goes, so I got a phone call from, and he mentions the name of the guy that my police officer relative had to ask not to come to the group because of his erratic, scary, alarming behavior. And he goes, I got a call from so-and-so. I was like, okay. And he's like, he says that you are talking about him in the community group. Excuse me? He goes, he says that in the group you're talking bad about him. And I was like, no. We were able on our own, without any of your help, we were able to get him to not come back to the group. And when I went back to the group, I simply said, so-and-so will no longer be attending this group. If you have any questions about why, you can come and talk to me. But everyone in the group already knew why. They all knew what he was like. So they all just go like this with a look of relief on their face. They're like, cool. And then we all just moved on with our lives. And he's on the phone with me. I heard you've been talking bad about this guy. I was like, well, it's not true. He goes, well, that's what he said. I said, well, he's lying. And he goes, he also said that you had someone in your family call him and threaten him. I just felt this welling up and it's like, are you kidding me? So I tell the pastor, I said, a relative had to step in and do your job for you. You're welcome. And I said, I cannot believe that you were finally calling me back and then holding me accountable to something that didn't even happen when I'm a member of the church. I am a member. And now you're calling on behalf of a non-member who you said you couldn't help me with because he wasn't a member. But all of a sudden, if this guy who's not a member has a problem with me, Lord knows I got to call Jordan and hold her accountable. That's something that didn't even happen. So I was so angry, and I had every right to be. So I said, you know what you need to do? You need to come to our group. You still haven't come. And you need to sit down and we can talk about everything that happened. And I have 10 witnesses that can go over every detail of what happened. So the saddest thing is I had to back up my lived out scary reality with the stalker and the scary man with 10 witnesses. I couldn't just tell him this happened and trust that he believed me, because he just didn't indicate at all that he actually believed me. I end the phone call with like, I cannot believe you're doing this. He goes, okay, well, fine. And then hangs up the phone. That's not the end of the story, obviously. I ended up working on staff with this guy for, years and years later. And He tried to stop me from getting on the diaconate. He tried to corner me in the interview meetings and be like, are you sure you're going to be able to submit to men because of this incident? So it acted like I was this big problem. I kind of like would walk around me with like wide eyes, like, ooh, there's Jordan. Don't watch out for her. He tried to stop me from being a leader in the church. It didn't work. There were enough people that knew me well enough. I still got nominated. I still became an officer. But then I got into seminary, and he decided he was going to rally all of the classmates together for a meeting, and they all got together and had lunch and coffee. But before that, one of my classmates said, you're missing someone from the group. There's a guy, he said, there's a guy named Jordan who made our program too and isn't on the email list. We need to invite him. And then the pastor goes, well, it's actually she. And yeah, I know she was accepted into the program. He didn't invite me. So they all go and have this meal. So all the men are supported and celebrated, but I'm being punished for having told this pastor no. And rightfully so. I could have been harmed. My body was in danger. I think that's the biggest takeaway, is when a church doesn't care about your physical safety. That's the moment you're supposed to leave that church. They didn't care about my physical safety. It matters to me. It matters to my relative. It mattered to my group members. And I think it might matter to God. I think the way that I am treated and the dangers that are around me that are very real, that matters. And when a church completely throws a blind eye to your physical safety, you need to leave that church. They are not for you. And the fact that they made a big deal about me making a complaint means a glaring, you don't have a protocol in place, and that's on you. You're insecure about that, so you're trying to make me the problem. You see the blame shift? There's the narcissism. That's narcissism. I can't take responsibility for my own behavior. I'm going to project my insecurities onto the people who are making this problem come into my life because they're talking. I am blown away about how this was handled. In my next video, I will share about years later reaching out to this same pastor and having a meeting with him about the impact that this had on my life and what it did to my confidence, trust in the church, and self-esteem. And it would be interesting to hear it, because there was a cultural phenomenon, social movement called #metoo that happened in 2017 between this event of me needing to get a police officer in order to be safe in my community group at Redeemer Presbyterian Church, and when I officially and formally held this pastor accountable in a new mental state, having worked through some of my codependency, so I was able to use proper language. Really interesting. This event happened, traumatizing, still traumatizing to revisit it in my memory, that no one cared if I was physically safe and was mad at me for protecting myself, or mad at my relatives for stepping in for me. Like, it still blows my mind. But #MeToo happens. I'm hoping that there's a cultural awakening in this pastor. I'm still holding out hope, always holding out hope for these guys. I'll tell you about his response to me officially holding him accountable to this event years later in my next video. Thanks for listening, and stay safe.